No, probably.
Probably somewhere over 500K, well over 500K, depending on how expensive your house is.
All right, let's bring in our guest, Mattie Duppler. I don't know if we're going to have a debate here. Mattie Duppler, National Taxpayers Union Senior Fellow, and Seth Hanlon, Center for American Progress Senior Fellow. Seth, your heart's not in this, dude. I read your notes. You know what this is. Can you make a case for this that's not based on donors in the liberal states of New York and New Jersey that you're just trying to curry favor with as a Democrat? I mean, isn't that all this is?
Look, I think there's good reason to think that, you know, the parts of the tax bill was politically motivated, and when they were looking for ways to pay for the corporate tax cuts and the estate tax cuts and the other tax cuts benefiting extremely rich people, they singled out blue states, or they hunted for offsets that disproportionately affected people in blue states. There's no doubt. I mean, so that's where I think Democrats are coming from, and I think it's understandable. However, I do think that, you know, fully repealing the cap on the SALT deduction actually doubles down on the worst flaws of the tax bill, that it drains revenue, and that it's skewed to people, you know, people with the highest incomes. So I think they really need to be very targeted in how they approach this issue.
Mattie, do you have different viewpoint on this, or do you agree more than you disagree with Seth?
Well, I agree on the mechanics there, which is that this is a tax benefit that benefits the wealthy. But I would say that it's less politically motivated, and this is actually the right tax policy. The SALT deduction obscures bad tax and spending policies at the state level and more to the upper side of the income scale. That's because, of course, those higher income earners get greater relief from being able to deduct their state and local taxes from the federal ledger. So I think getting rid of the SALT deduction entirely is the right way to go, and certainly having a cap on it is a good start.
But Mattie, there's hypocrisy on both sides here. The Democrats are fighting for something they say is middle class and benefits the wealthy. The Republicans say, well, these states just need to cut their budgets and cut spending. But the federal government feeds at the trough of these states. New York puts in $35 billion more a year than they get back. New Jersey, $20 billion. Florida, which is held up as this model of fiscal responsibility, gets $15 billion more back a year from the federal government. So you could argue, well, the states need to cut taxes, but it's the federal government spending that relies on these states' high taxes.
Robert, I don't disagree with you that if we could move our tax policy in a way that allows for less redistribution from the federal level down to the states, that would be good for taxpayers at the state level as well. But if you look at what's happening with the AMT and the SALT deduction, moving backwards on the SALT deduction, it is laughable to say that this is a middle-class tax cut, because we know that high-income earners use it, but also because of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and as a result of diminishing the AMT, 5 million people who weren't benefiting from the AMT before, who are those high-income earners, are people who are now who were benefiting from SALT before, are now able to claim that SALT deduction.
Mattie,
so if you're increasing that cap, their SALT deduction goes from what was zero before Tax Cut and Jobs Act to $30,000.
But what do you think the long-term implication is, not just for the states themselves, but for the federal coffers, given that I think you will have a lot of movement in terms of where people ultimately, I think people are more mobile, especially at the high end. And what do you think that ultimately portends, though, for the federal coffers?
Well, I don't know, Andrew, if your argument is that people should be entrapped in states with bad tax policy simply so the federal coffers can grow, I would disagree that that's sound tax policy as well. I think it's good to have states be exposed a little bit more to the impact of their fiscal policy decisions. And if that requires states then to really scrutinize whether or not the spending and tax decisions they've been making are best for their taxpayers, I would argue that that's a win.
So, Seth, just in general, the Democrats have give very little credit to the tax reform plan for really anything. Do you think there's a total disconnect or no relationship whatsoever to the recent numbers we've seen in the economy to helping corporations that are now more competitive globally? Or how about deregulation? Is any of that helping with the jobs numbers or the GDP numbers or the new highs in the stock market? Or, I mean, do you really want to run against that in 2020?
I mean, I think people understand, you know, we're in the 9th or 10th year of a recovery that's continued along the same trajectory.
Really?
And so we...
But the GDP numbers don't confirm that, Seth. You never got above 1.9%.
So I think... Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, so when it comes to GDP, I think there's no doubt that both the tax cut last year and the very big increase in both defense and non-defense spending injected some stimulus into the economy, and GDP was probably bigger in 2018 as a result. However, we're already seeing that, or at least projected to see that, decline precipitously, which is exactly what the critics said, was that, the promised benefits of this bill. Remember, this bill was sold on...
We need to wait for that. They told me that it was going to happen in the first quarter, too, I mean, I've had people tell me the first quarter was going to be below 1%. It was 3.2%. So you can't take a victory lap that this is going to peter out until it peters out, Seth. Maybe it will.
That's fair. That's fair. But we can look at what is actually happening and what was predicted to happen. This tax bill was sold on the trickle-down premise of a boom in business investment that simply hasn't panned out. We're seeing consumption up. But the boom in business investment that was supposed to justify all these corporate tax cuts and make the bill pay for itself in the long run just hasn't happened. And so what clearly has happened is that the deficit has increased, corporate tax revenues have fallen off the table, and that's ultimately going to leave us in a bigger hole. And of course, as the critics predicted, the tax cuts overwhelmingly went to people at the top.
You must be ready for those talking points, Mattie, because I've heard them at least 1,000 times. Delivered the same way.
They're accurate.
Yeah, okay.
Listen, you got Q4 business investment that was above expectations, but you also have a wage story that I think belies this argument that there's no investment happening. Moreover, you saw yesterday from Powell, 2 of the criteria that he said show that there's strength in the economy is both consumer and consumer confidence, but also business investment. He continues to see that as being strong in the American economy. So I think you're right, Joe, to say that pessimism now about future business investment is not an indictment of the tax plan at all. And I think that wage story is super important. We'll see more job numbers tomorrow.
Do you think the tax plan pays for itself?
I'm sorry?
Do you honestly think the tax plan pays for itself?
I've never argued that the tax plan pays for itself,
You
and I
don't?
thought it should be revenue neutral to begin with.
Okay. But the point is, I can make things look good if I hand you money, right? I mean, if we do welfare for everybody, life can look much better.
You handed $10 trillion to Obama policies that made nothing happen, and so you can't. It doesn't always look good. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
No, I just have one more question for Seth. This idea that, as Andrew mentioned before, that there are wealthy people moving because of this change. Moody's just put out a report, and Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, now sounds like Art Laffer when they're talking about, these high taxes are chasing people out of these states. Moody's put out a report saying there's no evidence of that. Yeah. So when you look at what the Democrats are pushing for here, and they are all saying the wealthy will move unless we do something, is there any hard evidence that that's happening?
No, there's no hard evidence that it's happened in the last year. And then also when you look back over time, there's been plenty of studies that basically suggest that the tax flight is essentially a myth. I mean, it's far overblown. Only a tiny percentage of people move states in general every year. And then a tiny
We've had some high net worth people who've left New York, though.
Yeah, but that's very sporadic and it's very anecdotal. If you look broadly, the people who move tend to be the lower income people who can't afford to live there anymore. So that's why I think there's a lot of hypocrisy on the parts of the Democrats who are saying the reason we need to change this is because the wealthy are moving. And yet, despite some signs in the real estate market, we haven't seen that.
We did you did stories about the state of Connecticut. How do you explain Connecticut then?
Connecticut is a lot of companies moving,
right.
and again, it's a small decrease in population, but the makeup of that population is largely middle and lower income, as opposed to, yes, there are 3 or 4 high-profile billionaires who left, and that does affect the top line quite a bit.
All of the folks we know who are literally counting their days in New York City, 183 days, and they fly in, they fly out, they fly in, they fly out.
I have no doubt that anecdotally there are people now considering it or doing it. It just hasn't shown up in the data.
What would happen, by the way, if the state of New York said, you know what, we're not playing this 183 days game anymore. We're going to play a 120-day game. Meaning if you actually lowered the number, it would make the decision to live here or not, or to try to live in Florida and try to come in and out, a lot more complicated. Would it actually anger people so much they would never come to New York and it would hurt business, or would people say, you know what, I can't make this little tax dance work?
I think they would come here less often to do business and spend money.
All right. Well, Mattie and Seth, thanks. We got a number tomorrow. We'll see a jobs number. Maybe it'll be strong. Maybe not. Some wages or stuff. I don't know. Things seem like they're like percolating in this economy, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you both. Andrew, I'm surprised you don't remember Nespresso. Nespresso.
Yeah.
George Clooney is the global ambassador